Today I want to tell you about some road trips I took last spring and again this year, decades after I was a college student, when I would have had much more capability of surviving them than I do now. But nonetheless, I went out on the road to see what I could see. The reason was that the Potter conferences started back in October of 2011 was the first one, and we established that you folks had a desire for information that would help you cope with new technology. We've had several conferences since then, both here and on the road, and they've continued to be well received. But we wanted to find out with more specificity and more detail just exactly what you wanted. And so we came up with the idea of a listening tour, but it's different from what Hillary was doing. It's completely non-political and completely focused on newspapers. The idea is that if we want to serve you all, we should go out and we should ask you what you want. And better than that, if we can go to newspapers and see how things are going for you on the scene, then we can get some really good information about how to do Potter conferences and other efforts. Randy Picht and the RJI were very supportive to my doing this, helped me post a series of blogs about my visits, which you can find on the RJI site. And Doug Cruz and Missouri Press Association helped me find 8 papers to go see last spring. Now, this was what we now refer to as Potter Listening Tour 1.0. This was last spring. And the 8 papers that I went to were very much in the classic mode that Norman Rockwell found almost 70 years ago to the day. He went in May of 1946 to the Monroe County Appeal here in Missouri and did paintings like this. The papers I went to were very typical Midwestern papers, small towns, family ownership over many, many generations, and the whole family being involved in them. The first paper was the Houston Herald. Jeff McNeil is here. In fact, he'll follow me to tell you some more about what they're doing. I was real impressed with Houston. They have a very logical approach to how they do blend digital with print in a weekly environment. They kind of divide them. Breaking news is the province of their digital project. They pretty much put it up just as soon as they can. If people hear sirens, they expect us to have the story. Jeff told me the story of a baseball game that he covered. He tweeted when the game began, he tweeted when it ended, the final score, and then when he was waiting for the coach so he could interview him, he was standing next to the mother of one of the players, and her cell phone went off, and she just looked at Jeff and said, "That's you, isn't it? You're tweeting." So, I mean, people for the Houston paper have come to expect that they'll get their breaking news almost on a broadcast-like schedule. Feature stories, on the other hand, are the province of the weekly paper, Enterprise, that sort of thing. And they pour that into their print product. But they also use their digital assets for all of the pictures and things they don't have room in the print product to do. Also, I was impressed that even though the Houston paper at the time I was there, they had 8 employees, but they still managed to do a lot of digital. They just weren't daunted by the prospect. One thing Brad did bring up, though, when I talked to him, was he wanted a source so that he could time efficiently keep on top of all the changes that are happening on the internet and digital products for newspapers, and that's one of the things that the Potter Fund would like to get into, is some sort of a website that would help you all keep track of the latest developments. My next visit was to the Odessan in Odessa, Missouri. This was the paper that had the longest family ownership. That's publisher Betty Spar. her grandfather worked for the University of Missouri when the J School was founded, Walter Williams. Her father was a printer, and she grew up sleeping on newsprint in his office while he worked late at night. And then Betty took over the Odessan. Her two sons are co-publishers, and then there's this guy. And then to my right, that is granddaughter Hannah, a 2013 graduate of Missouri J School. What's interesting with the Spars is there's this family conversation about new and old technology. Hannah, came in from Missouri, much as I did 30 years earlier out of the J School with all these newfangled ideas. She put in a new production system, and also one of her pet ideas, there's a group of people who gather on Wednesday nights waiting for the print paper to come off the presses so they can get their Odessan right away. She wanted to start tweeting to them when the paper was ready. Her father, Joe, over here, however, does not own a cell phone, or at least he didn't a year ago. And so that would kind of get in the way of tweeting. Joe's quote to me was, I will get a cell phone when they have it like Dick Tracy so that it's a watch that is connected, which is kind of interesting because the Apple Watch had just come out while and I apologize because I have not updated this story to see if in fact Joe finally got, either a cell phone or an Apple Watch. But the next visit was to the Missourian in Washington, Missouri. That's Bill Miller Sr. doing a press check. What was interesting about the Missourian, comes out twice a week, was that they applied sophisticated technology not only to digital products but also to their printing. They were very, very proud of their new press facility. That's a 18-unit GOS. It was a used press, but they completely refurbished it with new technology. Back and behind there you can't see, but there's an entire room of switches and connections so that they can very precisely monitor their print product as it runs off the press. They have fiber optics and everything else. And what the Millers have found is that while some larger publishers like USA Today and so forth are pulling back from printing, that's given them the opportunity to grab a lot of printing products. And actually now, at the time I went there a year ago, 3/8 of their company's revenue was from commercial printing. So the newspaper business has sort of become a print or be printed kind of environment, and if you can be the printer, you can make a nice piece of change, particularly if you've got a pretty sophisticated operation as they do. They also are pushing into digital formats pretty aggressively. The interesting thing here, Bill Miller Jr. told me, was that they didn't really take off until they hired digital advocates, both for their web product and for their social media, people with expertise who focused on digital. And with that kind of special attention, they got digital revenue to the point where it was growing faster than their print revenue. So that was another thing we picked up that we wanted the Potter Fund to back, was the provision of digital experts for our newspapers to help to advocate for new technology. And the Build a Bear sessions we're going to have later today sort of came out of that idea. This is the Unterrified Democrat of Lynn, Missouri, which is easily in the top 5 of my all-time favorite newspaper names. What's interesting here, this is the only paper of the 8 I visited that had no digital presence whatsoever. But some of the explanation of that's Jerry Lynn Voss, an award-winning reporter, the editor of it. And you'll notice that she has both a rotary phone and a touchtone phone on her desk. All of the incoming calls go to the rotary phone. which is what, like 1960s technology. And she says, nobody can tell the difference, so I take it on that. See, the touchtone phone is for dialing out because people insist on, touch 1 for this or touch 2 for that. And, but Jerry Lynn's approach is literally, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So, but what Jerry was discovering, though, shortly before I visited last spring, they had a prominent local citizen involved in a motorcycle accident, and Jerry Lynn found out about it when one of the ladies in her back shop came up and told her about it, and that lady had found out about it on Facebook. So they had gotten scooped by social media. So Jerry, who's much more comfortable talking about pursuing hard news stories and things like that, and so we were swapping stories about that all the time. Jerry conceded that I'm going to have to get into the digital thing, and she too was interested in having perhaps a Missouri J School student come and help her get into all of this. So she knows it's coming too. Owensville, Dennis Warden, who's MPA president this year, similar to Lynn, they're neighboring counties. But he told a funny story of an advertiser who talked to him. He said the guy was talking to me like the newspaper industry was completely dead, and he was trying to console me at a funeral, but I reassured him that, the rumors of our demise were exaggerated. Again, and this is something that was repeated over and over again, our advantage is local news, local news. We're the only ones that cover the news of our community, and we focus on that. But Dennis had a website. It was Town News, as almost all of the people that I had, and he was actually making a kind of a nice piece of change off of his website because he was selling those advertiser directory ads down the sides of the website. One other interesting thing came out, the 4th generation of their family to be involved in this paper. Jacob, 25 years old at the time I interviewed him. His title was Digital Specialist. And he had, among other things, had started a Twitter account for the company, but they only had 93 followers, a dozen of whom were the cheerleading squad at the local high school. And even though Jacob was a millennial, he just wasn't all that impressed with Twitter. And I did not pick up a whole lot of interest on the tour in Twitter so much. There was interest in things like Pinterest, though, which is curious. North Missourian. Every paper I went to did things a little differently and tuned to their own market. Darrell Wilkinson here talking to me. Darrell realized early on that his county, which only has about 8,000 people in it, was not going to provide enough revenue for his growing family. He had 4 daughters, I think. And he started playing around with desktop computers in the 80s and eventually developed a way for real estate agents to place classified ads for properties throughout northern Missouri and southern Iowa. And that business took off. They've added car dealers and some other things, and the vast bulk of his revenue actually comes from that combination online and free distribution product. The ads are placed electronically, then they go into free distribution products that go across the parts of those 2 states. The way that Darrell puts it is that essentially he's a farmer. A lot of the farmers in his area love farming so much they hang on to that, but then they get a second job because that's the only way they can make a living. But they keep farming because they love it. So his idea is printing for pay, news for love. Now, when I visited these folks in Lebanon, this was interesting. This family originally started in radio in Kansas City, and Dalton was telling stories of his family in that business. But then in the early 70s, they built the Daily Record and then acquired another bunch of newspapers. And they are what Dalton refers to as platform agnostic, because he feels like it's a lethal combination to have both. They've experimented with a lot of different media. At one time, they had their own internet service provider. And actually gave classes in Lebanon to people to use the newfangled technology. Eventually, though, competition from the big Verizon and so forth became too much. They had to give that up. But the thing that struck me about talking to Dalton was that in the midst of all of it, he was, and this was true of all the people I visited, in the midst of all the concern about how are we going to make a living going into the 21st century with all this digital competition, there was a great concern about remembering our duty to provide accurate, vetted content for our community. Dalton had concerns about whether you can tweet and provide, the kind of context and integrity that you want to provide. And that was kind of a heartening thing to learn as I toured these papers. This was the largest company that I visited. The Russ family a year ago had 49 newspapers and 17 radio stations. And this gave them the resources to develop just about every conceivable revenue source you can think of, specialty products, events, and so forth. And they were looking for every possible way to make money. The key to the whole thing, though, was defending their relationship with readers and advertisers, making sure that we're reaching them in every way that we can, including, and another thing was people found a lot of success in being the local expert for their community and their advertisers in digital communication. Russ Media went so far as to have their own standalone ad agency to support customers' digital advertising. And that was last year's tour. This year, we decided to take, that we had kind of explored what I like to call the classic Norman Rockwell newspaper. The papers in Missouri were, of course, all Midwestern, largely agricultural communities, and 95% or more white. So this year, I'm trying to go to papers that vary geographically and also demographically. In other words, if you change the audience, does that change the kinds of lessons that I learned last year? We've really pretty much just got started. I've got two visits I want to tell you about. This is Nuevas Raices, which is in Harrisonburg, Virginia, in the northern part of the Valley of Virginia. Nuevas Raices means new roots, which seems appropriate for immigrants. Harrisonburg is known as the turkey capital of Virginia. They have a lot of poultry processing plants which draw Latino immigrants. They're up to about almost 20% of their population is Latino. But actually, Nuevas Raices has been around for 15 years and because an entrepreneur, a Hispanic entrepreneur, realized that there were Latinos spread all out around central Virginia and that he could reach them by creating a free distribution product that he distributed through Latino groceries, Latino quick stop stores, and even churches. And so they actually have about 13 different towns that they're in, 14,000 distribution. But the difference in the primary difference in the audience that I found in talking, that's Fernando Gamboa, the editor, was a couple of things. One of them is their thriftiness. I mean, Fernando says you got to remember we only make $2 or $3 an hour. Even though they have a 13-city distribution, they have no office. That is the Gooseberry's Coffee Shop, which is one of the places where he meets clients and where we talk for about 2.5 hours about his paper. And everything is done via cell phones. He has all freelancers who take pictures with these things, and everything gets sent in electronically to him. His wife does the composition for the paper. And in some ways, it's kind of a shoestring operation, but it's a paper that's been making money for a decade and a half. The other thing that's kind of interesting is their relationship with institutions. In that copy of the paper that he's holding, there's exactly one coupon ad about this big. They don't believe in coupons. They don't expect for the coupons to be redeemed because they're from countries where people, governments and other institutions make promises and don't keep them. So, on the other hand, the paper is filled with employment ads. They're all about going to work and getting a job. So it was very interesting. It's a kind of a different way of looking at things. Fernando is looking forward to the time that he's really hoping for immigration reform, because so many of the business practices that Hispanics want to do, they can't complete if they don't have the proper identification. Also, there's political information in his paper. There was one headline that, and thank God for Google Translate, that translates to, "Donald Trump has always been wrong." This was a very nostalgic visit for me. This was to my hometown, Culpeper, where I grew up on, and the paper that I grew up working on. It has really changed since I've been there. It's almost like two stories. I mean, Culpeper, which was founded in the town in 1759, the county in 1749, changed almost not at all for like 200 years. And then in 1980, about the time I left, it just exploded. The population doubled as it became a bedroom community for nearby Washington, D.C. The reason I have this here is this is the Culpeper Minuteman, which was originally formed during the Revolutionary War. And I used to play back in there when I was like 2-3 years old. So that kind of represents old Culpeper to me. And the result is the folks that are now working on the Star Exponent have to serve two quite different audiences. The old Culpeper people that I grew up on, who cater towards the print product and want news that's almost exclusively about Culpeper and resent any other news that gets into it. And then there are about 60,000 people in Culpeper County, 40,000 of them commute to DC, and the other 2/3 are interested in broader things and are intensely interested in getting stuff on mobile because they have these long commutes and they want to get the information off of their mobile devices. So the Culpeper folks are very intent on developing apps designed for mobile and that sort of thing. Also, social media is a big deal for them. They have more followers on Twitter and more likes on their Facebook page than the Charlottesville Daily Progress, another Warren Buffett paper that's nearby that's twice as large. Then that was the interesting thing. Here's the paper I grew up on that's now owned by one of the richest men in the world. And it's interesting, in Buffett's letter to stockholders in 2012, which is when he bought the newspaper group the Star Exponent was part of at that time, it's worth going back and reading. If you Google it, you can find it pretty easily. And he actually, I thought, did a pretty good job of summing up where the newspaper industry was at the time. And he had a couple of principles, one of which was don't give away your content. And they have a paywall immediately on the Star Exponent. You get 15-page views and then you have to subscribe. Also, Buffett referred to a sensible internet strategy. And I get the sense that the Culpeper folks are putting a lot more energy into their website than they are into their print product. They're putting a lot of money into that. And if you go to the Star Exponent website, it's got all the tricks and bells and whistles. And that's about it for that. The conclusions. These are the things that popped out during actually both the tour last year and listening tour 2.0 so far. Most of the small town editors felt like they knew their audiences, the ones that were their age, very well. I mean, it's a small town, you've grown up with people, you've got a feel for them, but they worry about their kids. They don't understand their kids and this Snapchat stuff and so forth. I was chatting with Jeff McNeil before this, and Jeff was telling me that they're starting to look into Snapchat because that's where the young people are going. I found that most people have had some kind of a web page for quite a long time, and as I said, quite a few town news folks. Social media is coming on more rapidly. Most people have Facebook pages. And I should have mentioned this before, the competition, the digital competition that's coming up for folks is mostly Facebook based. The anecdote I told about the Unterrified Democrat, but also like in Gallatin, they actually have a newspaper called the Gallatin Grapevine that's essentially a Facebook page. You can just put it up for nothing. So social media, particularly Facebook, seemed to be where the action was. Paywalls are sort of, people don't have the sense that they've figured out how to do paywalls yet. And of course, readers need to be re-educated to expect to pay for content. Digital revenues, sometimes people were happy with it, but for the most part, they were disappointed. The bulk of revenue comes from print. And then, as I say, it was heartening to me at least that in the midst of all this worrying about how are we going to make a living in the face of all this new digital content, that people still paid a lot of attention to their duty to provide information to their companies. What the Potter conferences, Potter Fund can do to help. Getting back to that question of what do the kids want, audience research and this is one of the things that we're looking for with the Potter Fund, is ways to provide market research for you guys that you can afford and is tailored to smaller markets. Digital advocates, just like the Washington Missourian, that really got their their digital efforts off the ground when they had advocates to focus on it. Turnkey solutions to specific problems. Judge Slivka's How to Do Quality Video Inexpensively was a big winner. What Brad Gentry was talking about, if you just want some time-efficient way to keep up with what everybody's doing. And then, of course, finally, fix the business model. You know, how can we make money in the digital age? So that was Potter Listening Tour 1.0 and 2.0 so far. Please follow me on Facebook and Twitter. And forgive me if my tweets are not as sophisticated. I only learned how to do it the same year as I started taking Medicare. We've got a little time for questions. Anything I can answer? I was that thorough? Oh, yeah.
When you were on your tour, did you find any kind of like magic equation for time management and ultra small shops? As far as having so much to do with very little staff?
No. I mean, what I found, and actually what I suffered from myself, was that there's even more pressure than there was when I was active in the business a couple of decades ago, because you not only have all the challenges you had in the old print-only environment, but you also have all of your social media stuff. You know, you're covering the story, you're thinking about taking pictures, but you're also tweeting, posting, and all the rest of it. You just sort of have to become like the kids, multitask. So no, not a magic bullet yet, but I'm glad to hear that that's what you're interested in. I mean, seriously, I mean, what I want more than anything else is an ongoing conversation with you folks about how we're doing with the Potter Fund and providing help to you and what more things we can do. So keep the cards, letters, tweets, emails, et cetera, coming. Yes, sir.
One of the things that
You gotta ask, gotta wait. Oh, can't do this. We don't know who you are until you say this.
One of the things that you mentioned that I think we're hearing a lot inside our industries, don't give away content, have a paywall, that kind of thing. And we've had some discussions with some web companies and digital media companies that are outside the newspaper industry, and they're very strong on, oh no, you got to reach everybody and let your advertising, your advertisers will see the clicks and your advertisers will pay the freight based on that. I think both of us are still subscribed to Warren Buffett's theory. Did you come to do you have a true opinion on that based on your research? I know you mentioned what Warren said.
Well, most people felt like they needed to not give their content away. There were dissenters. The folks at the Washington, Missourian, when I was there a year ago, had not instituted a paywall. And as I say, their digital revenue was growing because they were able to sell ads off it. The old free broadcast model, everybody gets it and then you sell ads off at the eyeballs. I think all right. The first thing to tell you is that nobody's really happy, at least among the people I visited. Nobody's really happy with what they're doing. They don't think they've got it yet. One of the things that I would really like to do is to take, for the University of Missouri Journalism School in connection with the business school and computer science, is to really take a run at the publishing business model and see if we can't come up with a comprehensive answer to your question. But the people that I talked to, they're experimenting with different things. Some people it was all free, sell ads off of it, and other people, were fairly rigid paywalls.
I do have a follow-up then. If we need to get moving, and we need to come to a decision, and we know we don't have an answer. Is it safer to have the paywall now and then remove it later, or would it be safer to give it away first and then institute a paywall? I've seen it work both ways.
Yeah, I personally, based on talking to people and what I've seen, I think the sooner you do something to indicate to your customers that your content has value. I mean, when something's free, people are trained not to value it. But if they pay something for it, and maybe that's the trick, is that, it's the old, like the penny daily thing. But as long as they pay something, so that they acknowledge that our content has value, I think that's something you have to do. You have to train people to think of news as something that they have to pay for. That's what I think, anyway. Anybody else? Yes.
Were any of the papers have their profitability leveled or gone up, or were they all trending the other way?
Now, actually, when you're talking to somebody about whether their business is making money, it's kind of a dance where you're careful. But I got the sense.
They tend to brag if they are.
So, beg pardon?
Brag if they are.
I got the sense that some people were pretty comfortable. See, the thing with community newspapers is you don't have the really brutal competition you have in metropolitan areas. And you have a more, particularly the folks I visited last year, the classic community newspapers, you got a more traditional audience. And even in Culpeper, my hometown, which has changed so rapidly, you still have that core of people who would rather read it in their hands. So, you're still making, my sense is that most of these folks are still making pretty good margins. But the sense is, and I think probably y'all are here because you're in something of the same boat. You know, you're okay now, but you've seen what's happened to what Dennis Warden called his big city cousins, and you want to get ready for it. So, I mean, and that's been true since the first Potter conference, is the sense that we're okay now, but we need to get ready for what's coming. Okay? All right.
Let's thank Walt. He'll be around for lunch if you have more questions.
Thank y'all.